Hello there and welcome to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers. And after several weeks of telling you that, well, we're playing with 20 planets, 30 science packs and so on, we're actually going to head off to another one of those planetoids today. Because in stream number 5, we finally managed to send Mike off to another planetoid and send him off to Muluna to see what was going on over there. So this was done by chucking him in a rocket, sending him up to a space platform, launching up into space and over to the new platform. Because he's been building a ship in order to get over to Muluna. And it's not very far, so it wasn't too difficult a job, but it did still need to be done. So, yes, up here we have, ta-da, the Mike Scout ship. And this ship up here, well, it's a fairly small one, but it's got all the requirements it needs to do for the short journeys. So we built it in Norvis orbit, which means we don't have to worry about any sort of defences. We've only got these tiny little rocks bimbling around, and they don't do any damage when they hit the ship. Unlike in normal space age, though, we haven't managed to research grabbers yet. So this ship can't actually provide itself with any resources. We have to ship everything up from the ground that it needs, and so that means we've needed to tweak the recipes slightly. So over here we've still got the same oxidizer recipe where it takes in iron ore and water, and it makes oxidizer out of those for the engines. But instead of being able to gather that from asteroid chunks, we've had to send it all up from the ground. So he's done that. He sent a few loads up in the rocket, and well, we looks like we churned through it all. But we do still have slightly over half a tank of oxidizer, so that's going fine. Similarly over here we need the rocket fuel. Now the rocket fuel is done by a completely different recipe from vanilla space age. Here we're turning rocket fuel, appropriately enough, and water into liquid rocket fuel. So I guess we're sort of dissolving the rocket fuel capsules in the water. I don't know. I'm not going to think about it because that way lies madness. But this meant, yes, we brought up barrels of water, as you can see here, and Mike's been getting rid of the barrels, sending them back down to Norvis as well to keep the place tidy. And that's allowed him to build up a little bit of water, half a tank of each of these. In fact, I think we had more than half a tank before, but we've used it by sending the ship back and forth to Muluna a few times. So it's not actually all that far to Muluna. So let's set off. We've got the lovely rainbow engines working way down there, and as we go, just before the in-flight meal gets served. Oh, we've arrived. There is Muluna. So, like I said, it's not very far to this planet. Which is, I'm probably going to think, oh look, there's Norvis over there in the distance. Yes, it's not very far to Muluna, but that's quite nice because it's supposed to be your first attempt at spaceflight, and it allows you to ease yourself in gently and slowly. So from here, let's drop down to the planetoid, pop out in the little capsule, fly over, deploy thingies, solar panels I guess, and drop in. Lots and lots of heating. Yes, there are some clouds, which is a little bit odd given this seems to be just a rocky moon, but never mind. And that drops us in with a bump onto the surface of Muluna. And this is a strange place, so let's dig in and have a look around. The first thing we noticed on Muluna when we landed was that there are loads of these drop pods, cargo pod containers, just scattered around the place. And interestingly, these seem to be there to give you little bits of resource that you might need in order to get your factory up and started. So for example, this one over here has got some quartz in it, which seems slightly unusual. We don't know what to do with that. We've got a little bit of plastic over here. Now that we could ship over from Norvis, but still, it's nice to have these things there. And I feel there's been a general push in space age for planetoids to be designed in such a way that you can drop in on them without any resources at all and still manage to escape. So that's probably why we've got some beginner stuff there. For some of the loops over here we needed sulfur, and that was supplied in a small quantity as well, and we've been able to then make more of it afterwards. So, the planetoid, well, what do we have here? We have a number of patches of resources. So there's some stone, metallic asteroid chunks, oxide asteroid chunks, carbonic asteroid chunks. These are all quite familiar from normal vanilla space age to me, and stone's fairly familiar from, all of Factorio. We've also got anorthite chunks available down here as well, which seems to be an aluminium holding a rock. So there's a variety of things we can pick up from the resources on the planet. At this stage, Mike has spec'd out lots and lots of drills to go on all of these patches, and not being able to place very many of them so far because we've only just got here and we don't have a lot of resources yet. Similarly up here for the various asteroid chunk patches, and we'll start using these resources as we get on to need them. But I don't want to dwell too much on this because this is something that is very much not finished yet. So we'll take a look at it once it's done. What I do want to have a look about and talk about is our sort of feelings about Muluna and our initial impressions, because it's very, very different from anything else we've encountered before. And that and one of my thoughts with that was this is one of the things I like about Space Age. every different planet, at least in vanilla Space Age, every different planet I went to had a completely different feel on it. It was so you go to Fulgora, you have to deal with the scrap mechanics. You go to Gleba, there's all the growing, and you go to Vulcanus, you've got the lava processing, all of those sort of things. So there's every planet is completely different from anything we've seen before, and that has continued with Muluna. So I'm very, very happy to see that, and it's been quite interesting listening to Mike talking about it, and then just rummaging through the recipes in the Factoriopedia, trying to work out how on earth he's going to get, I don't know, sulfur or wood or iron or any of those sort of things. We also noted that adding in the Lignumisp start has made quite a big difference on Muluna, because suddenly all of the belts require wood to make. Now if you just dropped in here without the Lignumisp start, you go, okay, well I want to make belts, so I'll pick up some of these metallic asteroid chunks from over here, I'll crush them down, and then and that'll get me the iron ore like this, and then I'll cook that in the furnace, and I'll have iron plates, and I can make that into belts. Lovely. But because we've got the Lignumisp system running here, making basic transport belts requires wooden transport belts, and making wooden transport belts requires lumber and wooden gear wheels, which requires lumber, which requires wood. So we've got to start off that extra step back and somehow make wood before we can actually start making the belts and things. And that's made things a little bit more complicated, because the ways of making wood on the moon are a little bit tricky. And this meant that Mike and Tristan spent a fair amount of time working on getting these sort of proof of concept loops up and running. So, for example, this one is attempting to make wood from very little, apparently. So what we've got over here, let's have a look through it. So at this point, we're bringing in ice and melting it to get water. That's fair enough. The ice comes out of the oxide asteroid chunks up here, as you'll have seen in previously in Space Age, so that's not a problem. That's melted down into water, fine. Then that's passed into these machines, which are electrolyzing water out into oxygen and hydrogen. Fine, that makes a reasonable amount of sense. The oxygen is being stored in a tank, the hydrogen is being fed over here, where it's being voided by this chemical plant, because we don't actually need any hydrogen at the moment. So we're blowing off some hydrogen and giving the moon a bit of an atmosphere. That seems reasonable. Okay, fair enough. Then over here we're doing some rapid ice melting here. So this was just to get the system started, perhaps. And then over here we've got a rapid ice melting, which works in a slightly different way. So that's burning carbon in a chemical plant, and then and using some of the oxygen to melt the ice quickly. Into water and carbon dioxide. I'm not quite sure exactly how the... oh, I see, yes, the oxygen is there to allow you to burn the carbon, and that produces the extra heat to allow you to then melt the ice into water, and it produces carbon dioxide as a byproduct. Fair enough, that makes quite a lot of sense. And then you can pass the water back round to go through the system again to be re-electrolyzed to get you the oxygen you need in order to burn some more carbon dioxide. Fine, that's quite that makes a reasonable amount of sense. I'm happy with that. Then over here we're doing some forced combustion, which is where we take oxygen and some carbon needs to be put in here in order to power the advanced boiler. But then that essentially we're burning the carbon in an oxygen atmosphere to produce more carbon dioxide, because apparently carbon dioxide is a thing that we need over here in significant quantities in order to grow trees in a greenhouse. So we're putting in seeds, we're putting in carbon dioxide, we're putting in water, and we're getting out wood and oxygen. That sounds pretty much how trees work to me, so I'm happy with that as a recipe. And then the oxygen can then be passed back around to here to be burned, some more carbon to be burned and passed around again to make it into wood. So essentially this loop here is turning the carbon and some water from the ice into wood, which, yeah, I think that seems reasonable. It seems fair enough. And over here then we're making some seeds to keep this machine running, and then any excess wood can be passed off down here. This is all fine, this is all great and working very, very nicely, except for one slight problem. Here, if you look at the crafting time for this recipe, we're looking at 300 seconds to run, and that produces 40 wood. So yeah, this is going to be producing 0.13 wood per second, which isn't very much. And so this is going to need to be drastically expanded, and I think that's going to be a job for the next stream. But as a proof of concept, this is working nicely and has indeed produced some wood. And as long as we keep topping up these boilers with carbon over here and putting ice into the relevant places, I think this system should just keep working quite nicely. And yeah, it's good. It just needs to be made a lot bigger, as is traditional in Factorio. The wood then gets passed over to here, where we have another slightly confusing loop going on. So yes, we're bringing in wood. It's going into a machine here that crushes it down and produces, I believe this is cellulose. No, just crushed wood, sorry. And that gets passed over here into this machine, where it can be then turned into cellulose by dissolving some of it with sulfuric acid. Okay, I guess. That makes a certain amount of sense. And then the cellulose can come around here and go into this machine, which is doing wood gasification. So this takes in the cellulose and produces petroleum gas and bitumen. The bitumen can be turned into solid fuel, which I guess we could then use to run the machines over here if we had an excess of it, or hang on to it and find other purposes, other things we can use it for if necessary. The petroleum gas then can be taken out and made into sulfur using the traditional recipe, which can be made into sulfuric acid using some of that water that we're getting from melting the ice over there, and then that can go in to dissolve more of the wood chips. So yeah, we have a loop here, and I gather this loop has a productivity of somewhere in the region of 600%. So for putting in 1 sulfur here at the beginning, you get 7 sulfur out after it's gone all the way around the loop. You do need to bring in some additional inputs, of course, that's the wood and the water, but it is producing important resources in quantities that we can then start to use. So at some point we'll be able to tap off this petroleum gas, for example, and maybe start making plastic. And once we've got that, and once we've got all of these sort of resources, then we can expand out and start actually building all of the things that a Factorio base needs. The mining is apparently pretty standard, although Mike did point out that there's rather extreme mining times on there. So you can see, for example, there's a 500% mining time on the oxide chunks, a 2000% time on the metallics, 1000% on carbonic, and then all the way down here in the bottom corner, we've got a 2000% on the anorthite chunks as well. So all of these are taking between 5 and 20 times the amount of time that you'd expect a thing to take to mine, which is why this drill is sitting here drilling away merrily, but there's not very much stuff coming out. If we look at it, you can see there it goes, progress meter, and there, oh, it's made one. There it goes. So this is going to be quite slow, or to put it another way, we're going to need a very large number of drills. But you know, that's probably okay. We can get improvements to the productivity of these drills once we start doing those researches, and once we upgrade to more powerful drills. So it's not the end of the world. Worst case, maybe we'll just have to go and look out a bit further away and go out to say this anorthite chunk here and the oxide chunks over here, and so on, just to spread out a little bit and go and, well, find more resources elsewhere, basically. Power generation is currently being done through solar, and that's working decently well. Muluna offers us an extra 100% in solar power, so that's quite nice. We're getting a decent amount of electricity from there. So there's plenty of it available, but we do need a load of accumulators to keep everything running overnight. That said, most of the factory is asleep most of the time, so I don't see that being too big a problem. And I think that covers everything we've been up to on Muluna. So now let's have a look at what people have been saying about it, how they feel about it, and not just talk about my opinions, because everyone else's is also important as well. So Sophia was disappointed, and perhaps Tristan was entertained that the big first ride of the spaceship, flying all the way from Norvis to Muluna, was so short, when we've been sort of hyping it up a bit, saying, ooh, make sure you've got enough fuel, make sure you don't run out of snacks on the way over there, and that sort of thing. And then it took about 10 whole seconds to get here. That was amusing. Mark suggests that whilst it's quite nice to plan to go in and try and produce all of the resources you can on the planet from the resources it has available, it feels a little bit, it's not the way he would typically play. He would be generally try and ship things in from other planets as much as is required. So rather than trying to generate the wood using this very, very slow process here, why not just drop it in by rocket and spaceship? And there's certainly some truth in that, but at the moment we are a little bit limited in the number of rockets we can launch from Norvis. We have 2 rocket silos, so we are building them, and I think Tristan came along and put in all the productivity modules across here, so we've got a decent amount of productivity boost here, so an extra 32%. So that means we can craft rockets quite a bit more cheaply than we did before, and we're not going to be getting through as many of the blue circuits and the low density structures and the rocket fuel as we would otherwise. But still, launching stuff to space and then sending it over to another planet is a fairly expensive process. Wood, for example, well, you can fit 500 onto a rocket, so that's not too bad. But then that only makes 250 lumber, which means you can only make 125 pieces of belt out of it, so you're not going to be able to make an enormous quantity of belt from shipping wood over there. That said, maybe you could ship belts over, maybe that would be better. We seem to be using red belts, so for that we can fit 100 on a rocket. So actually we're better off shipping over the wood as long as we've got the iron over there, which we do seem to. So yes, we can ship some of the buildings out there that we need, rather than having to make everything on site. But I think it's good to have a basic system that can produce all the bits and pieces we're going to need. And in the past, in my previous game, I sort of reckoned on having the planets being mostly self-sufficient for producing infrastructure needs, so building up all the bits and pieces they want to place around, like the belts, splitters, assembly machines, and so on. But for bulk production of things like like science, at that point I was thinking it got a little bit silly, and I did start shipping some of the resources in. Actually, bulk production also included things like launching rockets as well. So yeah, there were some things that I would bring in from other planets, but it was quite nice to have them basically self-sufficient. It also meant that when I inevitably made a mistake with my spaceship schedules and the resupplies didn't arrive, the planets didn't completely grind to a halt and were able to sort of look after themselves to an extent. Mark commented on how he liked the way that all of the researchers were sort of automatically triggered by when you went out to Muluna and started doing things. So for example, when you mine your first carbonic asteroid, you get the recipes for crushing it and making electric motors with the carbon, and another recipe for rocket fuel. When you mine some metallic asteroids, you get the recipe for crushing them. And when you mine up some oxide chunks, you then get the melting of the ice and the oxide asteroid crushing, and so on. Also, once you start messing around with aluminium, you then get the ability to process the alumina, and this means so after you crushed the ore that I forget the name of, you can then crush the alumina, the aluminium oxide that comes out, and then that gets you the bonus in the same way that we're getting the bonuses with iron and copper crushing to get that extra bonus out there, and also it allows you to make the plates as well, which is handy. Once you've made some aluminium, you're then able to make aluminium cables and aluminium low-density structures. So out on Muluna, aluminium is functionally a replacement for copper. So you can make cables out of it, so you can make pylons and so on and so on. And because there isn't a ready supply of copper out there. And similarly along here, once you've crafted some seeds, you get the ability to do carbon dioxide venting and so on. And that's after wood cultivation. So the seeds we crafted on Norvis don't count until we got to that one. And again along here, you've got the advanced boiler once you've got some carbon. You get the wood cultivation once you've got some carbon dioxide, and so on and so on. So that's all, yeah, it all hangs together quite nicely. It gives you things to aim for without actually forcing you to build research packs to do all those things. Because, well, out there on Muluna, I know we're eventually going to make space science, but we haven't been able to get to that point yet. Mark also commented that the rate of growing trees is somewhat hilarious. Yes, this one takes a full 10 minutes if you use this recipe. Or if you use the slightly more water-hungry recipe, then you can bring it down to a mere 5 minutes. It's still a very, very long time. Tristan thought Muluna was quite neat in that it's bringing in the standard recipes over here we're sort of familiar with from Space Age, where over here, this time we're mining the asteroid chunks, but then you then crush them down in the same way that you did on a spaceship and can deal with the results after that. Although he did also comment on having the requiring wood for belts being a little bit of a surprise and a bit of an I was going to say perhaps annoyance isn't quite the right word, but no, he did actually use the word annoying. So yeah, that's fair enough. It's been a bit of a slow process to get all this set up, I think. But yes, he thinks the wood growing process is neat, and it does make sense. It feels like it follows a sort of vaguely sensible biological process going through here. I'm sure there are some micronutrients missing, but basically it sounds okay, sounds good enough. He did say though that the Factoriopedia was not ideal for this sort of process because it shows unresearched recipes. So for example, when he was looking for how to make wood, there's a lot of alternative recipes down here. So normally you gather it from trees. Fine, and you burn it in vehicles and boilers and so on, and use it to make all of these things. Fine, but then you've got all these options down here for making it. So you've got this one where you're crushing wood. Fine, you've got this one where you're from Tiberium. Okay, well that's not relevant yet. You've got this one which is it involves liquid fertilizer. I don't think we haven't got that one researched yet. We haven't got astroponics. Then this one we can do, so that's useful. And then this one we've got nutrients. We don't have that yet. And then we've got cryogenic greenhouses and so on. So there's a lot of recipes shown here that we don't actually have access to. On the one hand, you want the Factoriopedia to show you things you can't do yet because at some point you're going to be able to, and you might want to use it to research them. But on the other hand, it'd be nice to know which ones you have researched, which ones you can do, and which ones you can't. So perhaps all of these should show in their background of their icon the colour of the appropriate research needed to get that. So for example, for this is the Tiberium one. No, this is the Tiberium. So for the Tiberium one, we need to do Tiberium nuclear physics. So we haven't got this recipe yet. And in fact, we aren't even able to research this yet. This is red, so we should have a red background here. This one is also red, so we should, again, red background. This one is green, we've done that one. So either a green background or just no background to say, yes, this is available, and so on. So you could have a yellow background in there as well for a research that you could do, but haven't done yet. So yeah, I feel like there could be, I can see what he means, it could be a little bit better, especially as you're getting into the more heavily modded playthroughs, where you've got more and more and more different recipes and researchers and so on, all trying to produce the same things. So it's not a strong criticism, but it is a thing that could be slightly better. Mike said that he found building the spaceship much easier in this stream because he was less tired, so, you know, that's good. I suppose he started fairly late on in the last one, and I think he'd had a fairly busy week, so this time he was able to actually wrap his head around how to fuel a spaceship properly and build this perfectly functional ship. So that took him and Tristan over to Muluna to investigate things there. He said he was quite worried about it not having enough fuel, which is why he's got these 2 tanks and why he made sure they were both completely full before the ship departed the first time, and then felt slightly trolled by when it arrived so very, very quickly and used so little fuel. I think he used less than 500 out of each tank for that initial trip. He also commented on the mining times for all the resources on Muluna, with the 500% to 2000% mining times on everything. He said it's just a thing to get your head round, and it's not too bad because you do get a reasonable amount of stuff out of each asteroid chunk, and the patches aren't too small, so you can get a decent number of drills on them. So in a way, it kind of balances out. There's going to be a reasonable amount of resource coming out of here, and as you can see, at this particular stage, when, okay, granted, the factory hasn't really got going yet, but all of the belts are backed up. Things look like they're going kind of okay. So it's not too much of a worry yet, and we'll just need to keep an eye on it and see how things go. He's quite happy with his mining setup. It feels pretty tidy, and he said that the long mining times mean that he's not too concerned about having a mixed belt bringing all the resources down here. I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. I think maybe we should have some sorting going on the way down to make sure to take different resources different ways and have separate belts for each one, because otherwise I suspect at some point in the future we're going to have enough ice, or we're going to have enough iron, or we're going to have too much stone, or something like that, and it's all going to jam up and become problematic. That said, this hasn't happened yet, and there is plenty of room for expansion over here and putting in better sorting and so on, so it's not a worry, it's just a thing to consider for the future. He liked having all of the little pods sitting around with the resources, the ones we went out and looked at earlier, because it meant that he then had enough to get his production systems up and running without having to do enormous amounts of hand feeding of everything. But on the other hand, he did comment that when he first arrived, his first priority was looking at the requirements for the science pack that comes from here. So there is going to be, at some point, space science available. We haven't even researched it yet, but at some point we're going to have space science available. And so he wanted to be able, he was looking at the recipes required for that and how he was going to get the bits and pieces required. And it looks like the recipe is fairly similar to the vanilla one. I think the glass is new, but maybe that's to give you a sink for all of your sand that's coming out of the crushing processes over here. But basically, yeah, this looks reasonably similar to the vanilla one. So yes, he was looking into obtaining ice and iron plates and glass and carbon, which is why he's got the big mining area over here. And then realised that actually the first challenge was going to be producing enough belts to get the whole system up and running. So that's why this system has then become added in as a sort of not an afterthought, but then that became the main focus of the second half of the stream, while he was trying to get everything together and allow it to get up and become and allow the planetoid to become reasonably self-sufficient. Having not thought of that in advance did mean he was scrabbling for things to do a little bit during the stream, or rather scrabbling a little bit for things for Tristan to do during the stream, because there was quite a lot of waiting for trees to grow. So they were, at some point, they were standing around on the planet watching plants grow, which is not the best way to play Factorio, but when you've got such a limit on some of your initial resources, it's quite hard to then expand this one out. However, now that there is some wood, that means we can now get a decent number of seeds from this machine down here, and then we can quickly multiply this thing up here upwards as we go. The question is, are we going to be able to make the chemical plants and the advanced boilers, given that chemical plants require electronic circuits, and advanced boilers only require metals and boilers and things. So actually this looks like it's going to be quite doable. The advanced boiler is iron, steel, more iron and stone, probably stone bricks actually. And we've got all the infrastructure here we need to make those, and we should have a decent supply of iron coming out here. Okay, some hand feeding is probably going to be required, but okay, but that's fine. We can make all of those. And then the electronic circuits. Well, if we can use the aluminium to make in place of copper for the wires, which I think we can. The electric cable can also be made from aluminium. Yes, there we go. So we can use the aluminium to make the copper cables. Well, we'll just call them wires at this point, shall we? And then you can use iron plate and aluminium wire in order to make the green circuit. And that's going to allow us to make the chemical plants. And so, yeah, I think actually building this whole system out and making it much, much bigger is going to be quite feasible, even with just the resources we've got. And then that's going to allow us to make wood and therefore seeds faster. So it should snowball fairly quickly until we've got decent amounts of wood available, and then that can flow out to give us decent amounts of petroleum gas, which can make so we can make plastic, and then from that we can then move on and start thinking about other things. But most importantly, actually, I think the wood is going to be for making all of the belts around here. So yeah, we're going to need a lot for that, but I don't see that being too much of a problem. Mike noted that there are a lot of cliffs on Muluna, so this whole stripe of this whole zebra over here, which he said kind of looks like a fingerprint. And yeah, that's going to potentially cause some issues. I think especially as the bus was initially built pointing out this way, and then we realised there were cliffs here. It's been turned to point upwards. Maybe it'll loop round the top of the of these ore patches and head off over this way, because there seems to be quite a lot of space over here, although I do see some more cliffs poking out over here. Because, of course, as you're well aware, we don't have cliff explosives yet, because that isn't a Norvian technology anymore. You need to go off to other places. And whilst we can blow up the odd one with nanobots and grenades, it feels a bit cheap, and there's so much of it out here that we don't want to be working our way through all of that with the grenades. So I think we probably won't do it that way. Saphira's pointed out that it might be a good idea to send someone like Tristan off to go have a bit of a run around and see how big an area we've got. I'm sort of assuming, based on my understanding of game design, that we're going to have a starter area here that gives us all of the resources we need and a little bit of space, and then all of these cliffs are sort of functionally to trap us in that area, so we can't expand Muluna too much until we've gone off and got the cliff explosives, at which point we'll be able to make it much bigger, much more easily. But in the meantime, we're probably going to be restricted to an area probably maybe a sort of circle that will fit on screen now. I don't know. We'll have to explore it a little bit more. But with there being a bit of cliff up there and a bit up over there that we've already found, I suspect we're not going to get an enormous area to play in. But I think that's probably fair enough, because I suspect you could make Muluna quite overpowered for resource generation if you didn't have something to limit you a little bit. Mike also draws our attention to the fact that making rocket parts on Muluna is half the price of making them anywhere else, and so that's going to make Muluna an excellent place for launching stuff out to anywhere else it needs to go. Or possibly, if it needs to be handed across between spaceships, it's going to be better to drop it onto Muluna and then launch it back up again than it would be to drop it onto Norvis and launch it back up again. Now, ideally, you don't pass stuff between spaceships, you have it staying on a ship, but occasionally you do need to do something like that. But if we can turn Muluna into a good supply of all kinds of resources, then it's going to be very cheap to get them off this planet. So, next time, we're going to be coming back to Muluna, doing some big expansions and trying to get this place up and running and producing lots and lots of all of the resources we could possibly want. So please make sure you come along to Monday's stream. We won't be doing that on this Monday, because we'll already have done it, because these videos are made somewhat in advance these days. But maybe we'll be up on another planet by then. We shall see. So please make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on all of those streams. I'll be back, as I say, Monday 7:30 PM UK time for another Planetary Pioneers stream. And I'll be back on Wednesday as well, where I should be carrying on with some Foundry. At this point, I've done one stream of Foundry, and I'm really enjoying it. The game is coming together very nicely, and I've now got to that point where the game has just sort of started to click. I've got all the automation starting to run nicely. All kinds of things are being built up, and so I think it should just snowball nicely from here. And so I'm really enjoying it, even if it does make my graphics card make my room rather hot. There will, of course, be more videos coming out every Thursday and Friday, so keep an eye out for those as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.